80 years worth, almost around 80 years worth of negligence. This is the first bill since 1960 that we're actually getting a comprehensive infrastructure bill. A very large one, to say the least, which is pathetic. And now we're on to another Biden topic. Just yesterday, Biden has declared that he has had a bipartisan deal where he has 60 votes for a new infrastructure plan, a $1.2 trillion plan over 8 years. Yeah, so I think it's lackluster. There's nothing much to say about it. I think it's pathetic. Even the $2 trillion plan he proposed was lackluster as well. I felt that was lackluster because really this infrastructure plan, the main purpose of it is to get involved and to compete with China. And, China is 10, 20 years ahead of the US in terms of infrastructure. It already has high-speed rail in its biggest cities. It has like massive factories the size of Boeing on creating microchips, which are now really limiting exports, which then is now hurting global electronic sales and global electronic production. And also, they're the first ones to create 5G and to very cheaply create them as well by just putting a converter on the 4G towers. So, yeah, it is. They're far behind, and this $1.2 trillion deal is, you can put it as nothing but shit. It's absolutely shit. It's absolute crap. There's no fucking way they're going to compete with China with this fucking deal. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. With Biden's kind of notion of bipartisanship is it's bullshit. I think, really, the two people that you should just like that really stop this is Kristen Sinema of Senator from Arizona and Joe Manchin, Senator from West Virginia. These two people somehow, in some way, want to make a name for themselves and really blockbuster the $1.7 trillion deal first, and then came to the conclusion that $1.2 trillion deal was good enough to compete with China, which is absolutely lackluster. It's absolutely pathetic from the U.S. government and the U.S. system. This is the previous deal. This is the $2 trillion deal that was proposed by Biden in around May, late May. And really, this $2 trillion deal had a lot going for it, I would say. It was still lackluster, but it was significantly more. One of the things that the Biden administration absolutely slashed was this caregiver for the elderly and disabled. $400 billion worth of funding for the elderly and disabled were taken off. And I think, in a moral standpoint, that's absolutely horrible. $400 billion. This is a significant amount of money to give to the elderly, and to give to the disabled, and that was slashed. That was slashed from this deal, and I think it's unacceptable with them being the richest country in the world. They should be able to pay $400 billion over 8 years for the elderly and disabled. $50 billion, I think, is absolutely a doable solution, and that's was cut. In terms of other things as well, this bill right here, $650 billion, this was almost slashed in half in the New Deal, the $1.2 trillion deal, which is absolutely insane. Looking at kind of the things that's going to, and a lot of the things here is lackluster. $100 billion for high-speed broadband for the $2 million deal, but now it's slashed by a significant amount. I don't know how you can get broadband, high-speed broadband in every city for $100 billion, much less, almost half of that, but over 8 years. But it is astonishing that the richest country on earth cannot come up with a consensus on getting high-speed internet for everybody, even in the major cities. I think it's absolutely crazy. Public housing at $40 billion. This was in the $2 trillion deal. Now it's slashed by almost half. I don't think This is absolutely insane as well. How can you provide people with housing with $20 billion of funding over 8 years? This is over 8 years as well. This is over 8 years, and it is disgusting. How low, the funding is. And we look here, like R&D for small businesses, 31 billion. Not a lot of money for the $2 trillion. Now even less, right? Dislocated workers program, even less money now. Yeah, it is disgusting how little money is being invested into the American system, and this electric vehicles networks for 500 EV stations, that's been slashed to around $100 billion. That's not enough. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this rightly. $100 billion over 8 years is not enough. Around $16 billion each year is not enough to supply electric vehicles and to supply electric vehicle charging stations across America. That's not realistic. Really, the only places they can really put it is in the large cities. And even then, it's going to be a massive effort to put them in all the large cities. And not to mention the less, that a lot of these rural areas won't have access to these things. And they do not have the money to buy electric cars. You can put all you want these EV stations in, but if people don't have the ability to buy these cars, then what's the point of putting them in and putting so much time and effort into them? More and more things should be put into modernizing the public transit system, improving the metro, putting subways in, creating like tram systems, more effective bus lines. In LA itself, usually the average time to walk to the nearest public transit station, is a bus station or train station, is 3 to 4 hours from someone's house. It's absolutely unacceptable. That's the average in LA, and $85 billion is not going to cover that cost for LA, even with Chicago, New York, Texas, Austin, Phoenix combined. And it's even smaller. It's not even $85 billion anymore. That's probably cut in by almost 2/3, or almost 1/4, or almost a half. So that's absolutely crazy. And also, because your AOC brings up a very very important point here as well, is that there is not a diverse coalition. If you look at this bipartisan coalition, there's one main kind of consensus, is that they're all white. I'm sorry to say it for everybody else, and to state the obvious, they're all white. They're all white. And this is the representation of America. I mean, America is a multicultural state, and the only people that Biden's showcasing and that have come to a deal, quotation marks deal, are white people, white politicians, and this is what the representation of America looks like. This is what the moderate wing of bipartisanship looks like. White politicians coming up with these solutions, and I think it's absolutely it's not great, because there's African Americans, there's Latinos, there's APII, and many other ethnic groups that want more. They want more from this, and they're not getting it. And even then, like even in Joe Manchin's state, West Virginia, it is the poorest state in America, or maybe second poorest state in America, by far. It is a very poor state, and a lot of the things like Medicare, they really rely on. They really rely on subsidies. They really rely on this, because when the coal industry left, and when the local government, the state government, and kind of their senators abandoned them, they have nothing really left. And even though they're a Republican state, I don't think that they deserve the kind of the poverty they're getting. It's absolutely absurd. And Joe Manchin should see that, and should see that this infrastructure bill, if it was larger than $2 trillion, it was around maybe like $10 billion over 8 years. Maybe then we might see some change. Maybe then we might see some progression. That's just my view on things. And now we're going to watch Bernie Sanders right here talking about kind of his frustration with Mansion and Cinema and kind of their character building with the public, I guess.
From the White House and Capitol Hill, Vermont Independent Senator and Budget Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders. Senator, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us. I want to start with infrastructure. You've been clear that any bipartisan package on physical infrastructure is also to be accompanied by a larger, more progressive, much more expensive bill. A bill that could potentially pass, of course, only with Democrat support through reconciliation. Do you think the more moderate members in your caucus are going to go for that two-step approach?
I do, and I'll tell you why, Andrea. I think every member of the caucus and almost all Americans understand that today we are living in a society where the very, very rich are getting phenomenally richer. Jeff Bezos is worth $200 billion, one person. Meanwhile, the working class of this country is struggling. You got 600,000 people who are homeless. You got parents who cannot afford childcare. And on top of all of that, we have to deal with the climate crisis, which I think every scientist is telling us is going to be devastating for this country and the entire planet. And we got to invest in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to sustainable energy and energy efficiency. So we have an enormous amount of work to be done. And at a time when the very rich and large corporations are often not paying anything or very little in taxes, they're going to have to pay their fair share so that we can protect working families in this country and deal.
Yeah, so that's something I totally agree with Bernie Sanders, is they need more. You need more money. You need to put more money into these programs. With Bernie Sanders on the Senate Budget Committee, conservatives are outraged that he's proposing a new $4 trillion bill alongside this $1.2 trillion bill. Almost around 80 years worth of negligence of their infrastructure, of their levees, of the roads. Like, this is a negligence. This is the first bill since 1960, from the 1960s, during kind of Johnson's era, LBJ, and John F. Kennedy's era, that we're actually getting a comprehensive infrastructure bill. A very large one, to say the least, which is pathetic. Because then what have we been doing for the last 80 years of, history? Instead of being sitting as the complacent world power, well, it looks like China has caught up very fast. Because in the last 10 or 20 years, they have really caught up with their infrastructure. When their economy is down, they invested in infrastructure. When their economy is up, then they use that extra revenue for their social services. China has universal health care. The U.S. does not. And that says something. With China's kind of GDP per capita being quite low and not being of an industrializing nation, they still have the ability to provide universal health care to its citizens, which is pathetic.
So I think what we need is a progressive tax system that says to the wealthy and large corporations are going to pay their fair share. Then we're going to invest in our roads and bridges. We're going to invest in transforming our energy system. We're going to invest, for example, in expanding Medicare. Right now, unbelievably, you got Medicare not covering dental care, vision, hearing aids, and we've got to do that as well. So all that I'm saying, and I think the American people agree, after years and years of worrying about billionaires and the rich, now it's time to have a budget that speaks to the needs of working families and the climate crisis that we face. That's what I'm.
Yeah, that's true. That's it. That's why I said this is why I've been preaching for the last few minutes. You need to work on that working class. You need to give back to the working class. You need to give back to the middle class. They are the framework of kind of the economy. If they don't have spending power, how do these big businesses and how do these companies stimulate the economy? If they don't have spending power and there's no circulation of money, that just leads to inflation.
I'm trying to do.
I want to ask you about voting rights. We've seen advocates like Stacey Abrams, former President Obama, open to compromises on issues like the voter ID and purging voters. Is it time to do something smaller? And is there any way to get past the ironclad 50-vote Republican objection after Mitch McConnell's personal appeal to them?
Well, Andrew, I think Chuck Schumer made a good point yesterday in his remarks, and that is it really is disgraceful. I don't mean to be overly partisan, but it really is disgraceful that we did not have one Republican vote in helping us deal with the reality that in states all over this country, there is a concerted effort to deny African Americans, low-income people, young people, the right to vote.
Yeah. I do think the filibuster is a flaw within the American system. When a party doesn't want to work with you and doesn't want to cooperate with you, just like other right-wing parties, like the AfD, Vox, really before it was the Brexit Party in the UK, now the Penn's Party, Action La France. You need to have those safeguards, and one of those safeguards is not the filibuster. You need to get rid of the filibuster, because if you look at America, one of the flaws within its election system is the Senate. The Senate is a flaw. In the House, you really see a representation of the American people a lot more clearly, because they are split up into constituencies, with them being split up by electoral vote. So in Montana, you have one seat in contention for the House, because it has what electoral vote. In Vermont, where Bernie Sanders is staying, that is around 4. I think it's 3 or 4. I forgot, but it's around that number, and they get that number of seats. In California, that's the same. They get a lot of seats. In Texas, they get a lot of seats too. In New York, they get a lot of seats as well. And that's the representation of the populace. That's the representation of the people in the state, and that's fair. But for the Senate, it's a little different, because whether you're in California or Montana, you get the same amount of seats. You get 2 Senate seats.
Country, understand that now is the time to act. And I will also tell you, clearly we are constrained by the fact that we only have 50 Democrats. And to my mind, what this next election is going to be about is whether the American people want us to have a government that represents all people, that believes in democracy or not. And we need a hell of a lot more Democrats in the Senate than we have right now.
I want to ask you about another aspect of this. People have focused a lot on access to voting, but isn't an even more important issue nullification of voting? The aspects of the bill, of the local bills, state bills that have been pursued by Republican legislatures that actually take the rights away from state-elected voting experts, including some Republicans, Arizona, Georgia, and gives it to carefully selected partisans who know nothing about the law and are going to nullify voting.
And gives power to the legislature. We can see, the writing is on the wall. We're seeing, how the Trump people behaved after the presidential election. I can see a situation where in a given state, somebody says, you know what, I have a problem. I have a real problem. I don't have any evidence, but I got a problem with the votes that came in this county. And we're going to take away the responsibility of determine whether the results in that election were legal or not. We're going to transfer it to the legislature. Oh, and by the way, the Republican legislature votes to say that that count was not proper. That's what we're looking at. Taking away the power of local elected officials who have historically had that power, have done a good job in that respect, and giving it to partisan legislatures.
So is there a compromise, a bipartisan compromise? You can't use reconciliation for this.
Yes, you can use reconciliation for this, because Republicans absolutely hate reconciliation. They absolutely hate giving money to disenfranchised groups that they have been for centuries in America. And it's going to happen again. Okay, yeah, she's right. Even though she sounds like a dickhead right now because of it, and she sounds like a total liberal, she's right. She's absolutely right that Republicans and moderates will not like the reconciliation and to divide the wealth among the masses and among groups that really need it. They're not going to like it, and that's going to be the same, for everybody. That's going to be same for Doesn't matter if they're Mitt Romney. Doesn't matter if they're Mitch McConnell. They're all going to think the same. Even Nancy Pelosi. They're all going to think the same about reconciliation. Really, the only people who are standing up for reconciliation are the progressive wings of the Democratic Party, which are in the minority right now.